Today, the internet is full of articles about the unique painting technique of Leonardo da Vinci. Some even claim that he was a pioneer of nanotechnology, but in reality, the truth is stranger than any fiction. It seems that he didn't always paint his own pictures. Let's take a closer look at this incredible story, step by step and with solid reasoning. First, the astonishing realism of the paintings from the Renaissance era. Europeans are very meticulous people, and so, one day the British artist David Khokney, while examining the drawings of Ingres, decided to look at them under magnification. He was amazed at how realistic these works were, and Khokney also noticed a clear similarity with the works of the contemporary artist Warhol, who projected photos onto canvas and traced them. Khokney decided that Ingres used a camera lucida, a device that is a simple optical instrument, a prism, mounted on a stand attached to a drawing board. And the artist looking at his drawing sees the real image with one eye and with the other his own drawing and his hand. This helps achieve realism in the image. He thought of trying to study a variety of paintings from different countries and eras. And that's understandable. Creating a truly realistic painting turns out to be not easy at all. Didn't artists use all sorts of optical tricks in ancient times? Here, a lot of interesting discoveries awaited him. It turned out that the artists of the Renaissance era, that's the 14th and 15th centuries, painted with such realism that it would be simply unattainable without the use of optics. Here is a remarkable example. The painting by Jan van Eyck called Portrait of the Arnolfini Couple. In the painting, there is an image of a metallic chandelier, a candlestick. To confirm his hypothesis, Khokney even ordered an absolutely identical metallic chandelier. It was made. And then, after choosing the right light source, he got exactly the same highlights as in the painting. So why does it have to be optics? Maybe the artist just carefully and meticulously painted what he saw. But that's the point. The highlights on metal aren't just light and shadow. If you change the observer's eye position by even half a degree relative to the object, the highlight disappears. So, to achieve such a result, the artist would have had to fix his head and grip in place and work with the brush at a frantic speed. After all, the light source is the sun and it moves. This is necessary to remember the highlights, as they can't be reproduced from imagination alone. It will look beautiful, but it won't match reality. Second, artists have been using optics since ancient times. Let me emphasize again that this conclusion was made by a professional artist who is personally familiar with painting. In addition, Khokney noticed characteristic distortions typical of the use of optics in many paintings of that time. For example, the widespread left-handedness. For example, in the painting from the Franz Hals Museum, The Mary Company, where left-handed couples are dancing, a left-handed old man is wagging his finger at them, and under the woman's dress, a left-handed little monkey is peeking out. And it becomes clear to us that this is what happens when you trace a mirrored image. If the optics are imperfect, then during the process of projecting the original image, you have to move the canvas to bring different parts of the image into focus. In this case, you end up with errors in the proportions. And here is an example. The enormous shoulder of Ante Parmigianina, this is around 1537, the small head of Lady Genovesa Antonis van Dyck, 1626, and the huge legs of the peasant in the painting by Georges de Latour. And finally, the famous sfumato effect. This is the blurring, that is, the defocusing of certain objects in the picture. For example, the artist managed to project the image onto the canvas quite well using optics. The main thing is that they are already in focus. In this case, you can sacrifice the small objects along the edges. They are depicted in a blurred way anyway. Thus, Khokney has irrefutably and professionally proven that some artists of the Renaissance era used optics to achieve the most realistic depiction of reality. Simply put, they didn't draw, they traced and colored. Third, Leonardo da Vinci is the creator of an unknown technology. After all, it is Leonardo who is credited with the discovery of the sfumato technique. He didn't just experiment with optics, it all started with him. However, there is another feature of his paintings that Khokney did not study. For example, on the famous masterpiece Mona Lisa, there is not a single brushstroke or fingerprint visible. That is, he didn't just trace and color it in, but did it in some incredible way. I have to admit that I was truly enlightened by the words of a remarkable woman, an art historian, who once spoke on the Culture Channel in the program Academy. She said that today, artists simply aren't able to repeat the achievements of the masters of past centuries. They just can't paint like that anymore. The secrets of mastery have been lost. Suddenly, an audience member asked, "But what about forgeries?" But she explained that most often, what gets forged are just the signatures of famous artists on paintings by unknown artists from the same period and of a similar level of skill. So, why are these paintings considered priceless masterpieces, ones that simply can't be replicated and that people don't understand how they were made? And in the case of Leonardo da Vinci, the techniques are completely beyond the limits of artistic skill. That's why research on such paintings continues even today. So, the laboratory of the Center for the Study and Restoration of Museums and the European Synchrotron Radiation Laboratory have recently joined forces to uncover the secrets of Leonardo's mastery. This was written about in an article published in the scientific journal Angewandte Chemie. The research was led by Dr. Philipp Wagner. The scientists used a method called X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy. This allows them to study the structure of layers without taking samples, that is, without damaging the canvas. A powerful X-ray beam was directed at the canvas, the structure and composition of the layers were determined, and the following was discovered. Each layer of glaze is 2 micrometers thick, which is 50 times thinner than a human hair. In some places on the painting, the total thickness of all the glaze layers is 55 micrometers. This means that the master repeatedly applied layer after layer to achieve the desired effect. And they also reported that the pigment particles of the coloring mineral are so small that they cannot be measured by conventional means. It turns out that even if the pigment was applied so thinly and evenly that its particles are arranged in a single layer, they should not be larger than 2 microns, no more than a micrometer. But perhaps they are even much smaller. I will say right away that these results do not fit at all, not only within the framework of modern research on the technologies of that time, but also in the optical concepts of David Khokney. This just makes no sense at all. Fourth, how to make steam from stone is something our Dr. Gaspar knows. The average person lacks a solid grasp of the extremely large or small, with kiloparsecs and micrometers being equally meaningless to them. What does it actually mean? Naturally, he doesn't use them every day. Therefore, it is necessary to outline what exactly a pigment particle with a size of 2 microns is. Do you think you've ever encountered substances this fine in real life? Usually no. The finest substance you might have dealt with is talc, for example. It's used to make baby powder. The particle size of powdered talc ranges from about 2 to 10 microns. It should be noted that absolutely all paints, both now and in the past, are made using pigments as their base. Stones are not always used for this. Sometimes pigments are extracted from plants or even insects, but the particles of the coloring substance are always present. And our master simply had no other option with his paints. So, even if Leonardo had decided to paint his pictures with pigments mixed in a talc-based binder, even then he wouldn't have been able to achieve a paint layer thickness of 2 microns. Since a significant portion of the particles are larger than this size, and after drying, it's the size of the pigment particles that determines the thickness of the layer, how can you get such fine particles? Interestingly, talc powder is mainly used because of the softness of this mineral. It's the easiest to grind, but for painting, other minerals with characteristic colors were always used. However, all of them are significantly harder than talc, which means it's even more difficult to grind them to such a fine size. Today, this is done with modern mills, achieving pigment particle sizes from 15 to 55 microns. This is a mass and fairly inexpensive production of pigments for oil, alkyd, and other similar paints. Such a particle size is considered optimal. On the other hand, the smaller the particles, the better the properties of the paint. The grinding process also takes a lot of time and is associated with various technological difficulties. So it turns out that the current level of mass technologies allows us to apply a single layer of paint about 30 microns thick. Well, our cars, which are painted in several layers, generally have a coating thickness from 80 to 100 microns. So how did Leonardo da Vinci make his paints then? That's completely unclear. Everything that is ground or obtained by other advanced methods, even finer, is already called micropowders. And this is the subject of other fields: micropolishing, optics, science, nanotechnology, and typography. Printing inks are a special field. Pigments for them are obtained by a very complex chemical process. With these methods, the particles are grown and crystallized in a specific environment, immediately forming very fine crystals. Then the pressed sediment is still dried and ground. But this is not at all the same as crushing a whole stone. As a result of such modern and expensive chemical processes, for example, the following pigments are obtained. The yellow color is characteristic of needle-like star-shaped inclusions of alpha-ion hydroxides ranging in size from 0.01 to 10 micrometers. The red color is produced by tabular crystals of iron oxide hematite, alpha-ferrum 203, ranging in size from 0.05 to 1 micrometer. An increase in size to 10 to 20 micrometers shifts the shade toward cherry and lilac tones. Now, this is exactly the kind of fine detail that would have been useful for our artist to achieve his sfumato effect. But among these pigments, not all sizes are used for printing inks either. As a result, the ink for letterpress and offset printing forms a layer of color on the finished print that is less than 2 microns thick. So how did Leonardo da Vinci manage to technologically surpass our modern chemical plants with his medieval mortar and pestle? But of course, all this doesn't stump art historians and scientific skeptics. So what they say? He took his mortar and ground it more thoroughly. That's why he's a genius, let him work harder. So I had to figure out what that meant, to grind thoroughly in a mortar, and what such a tool is actually capable of. It turns out there are methods and guidelines for the process of grinding in a mortar. This process is still used in the pharmaceutical industry today. There is a peculiarity. The finer the active substance is ground, the stronger its effect on the body. That's why pharmacists try to grind it thoroughly. But everything has its limits. Here, the limit is this. If you can still distinguish individual particles by eye, keep working. And if you end up with an almost perfectly homogeneous powder, then stop everything and put down the pestle. You no longer have a criterion you need to reach. After that, you could keep grinding in the mortar for a whole year and nothing will change visually. Whether you ground it well or poorly, how many microns you achieved, you can't really determine. The method states that the human eye is able to distinguish individual particles of 70 microns in a single color powder. Therefore, when pigments are ground today to 15-25 microns, it's no longer possible to judge by eye, so a control method is used, sieving with microsieves. So what should I think? Leonardo's eyesight resolution was 40 times higher than that of any other person. Even for a genius, that's excessive. But if we assume that Leonardo da Vinci, before making his paints, wove himself a microsieve, then the Mona Lisa itself is no longer something to be surprised about. Since everything there and beyond is precise and micro, too many absurd and impossible things are layered on top of each other. Maybe this painting, like many others from that time, was simply made in a different way. Moreover, this fits well into the formulation of the lost secret. And what else could be lost there, if not a different manufacturing technology, the way the brush was trimmed, or the composition of the wiping cloth? That's enough fooling us, likely. Modern people aren't so stupid that after several centuries of painting with the same tools and materials, they couldn't repeat the achievements of one person 5 times. Or maybe it's printing. Art experts claim that Leonardo da Vinci's painting technique was as follows. First, he prepared the paint in a mortar using a method that, as we've found out, is impossible. Obviously using his genetically modified eyes, in which a modernized, highly transparent lens was combined with a retina containing 40 times more color-sensitive cones. It was probably terrifying to look into such eyes, and it's unlikely that such eyes could even fit in a human head. But they are exactly what provide the necessary image resolution for monitoring the production of micropowders in the mortar. Then, in the necessary places in different parts of the painting, he applied with broad strokes, having borders and transitions indistinguishable to the eye, paint of a single tone without making mistakes in the placement or contrast. Apparently, he first left layered tracings and complex color schemes, and also used amazing nanobrushes that allowed not only to apply paint precisely along the contours in the right place, but also not to leave brush marks, while controlling the density of the tone. Such a tool would ideally combine the properties of a sprayer and an artist's brush, something that no one has invented yet. Then he would take nano paint of a different tone and apply it as the next layer exactly to the right places, again across the whole painting and with the needed density. So, about 20 semi-transparent layers, each unique in configuration, uneven in density, and only when all the layers were combined did the final appearance emerge. At the same time, as we have already determined, Leonardo da Vinci had to create about 20 perfectly precise templates for each paint layer. Moreover, he could only overlay all these layers and check the final result virtually in his mind. They say there were no computers back then. Perhaps it's only into a mind capable of such abstract operations that even the most modern eyes could be implanted. Art critics and dreamers, well done. In the face of reality, any fairy tale will seem believable. I can also add that the mentioned technology is strikingly reminiscent of modern multicolor printing. There too, a color image is broken down into single color layers. Then they are applied to the paper in layers, each less than 2 microns thick. By overlapping each other, these layers create a multicolored image. Today, the number of these layers ranges from 2 to 6. Using more layers is not justified with modern technology.
It's complicated and bulky.
And Leonardo had up to 20 layers. Actually, color printing already existed in the time of Leonardo da Vinci. Yes, Scheffer, a student of Gutenberg, was already using colored inks, blue and red, for printing as early as 1457. His Psalter is the earliest known example to us, printed in multiple colors in 3 passes. There, the inks were different from today's, but still applied in 3 layers. However, it must be admitted, though it pains me, that layers of 2 microns each and a 20-layered, graphically very complex image are an infinitely distant technological prospect for the printing of that time. So we part ways with our dream of 20-color printing. Of course, against the backdrop of the official version, you can assume anything you want, it can't get any worse. But what do we have? Somehow this was done. Sixth summary. Let's still think about what we have. First, Leonardo's paintings and other works from that era generally do not feature masks. We are told that artists carefully smoothed out the paint layer, but then, in the 18th century, they completely forgot how to do it. Today we still don't know how to do it. 2. The sfumato effect, that is the blurriness of objects that are not in focus. This technique was done with broad strokes and in layers, but by the 18th century the knowledge was lost. It remains unknown today as well. Third, the dark tones in paintings of that time. We are told that this is precisely the result of using this sfumato effect. And to view such paintings, brighter lighting is required. But what prevented the artists from choosing lighter paint tones if they were painting with brushes? By the 18th century, artists were already getting the tones just right. 4. Extreme realism, unattainable to human vision and intellect with traditional painting techniques. We are told that this is genius, meaning a genetic modification of the artists of that time. But it's well known that ordinary people were taught this craft and its techniques. And by the 18th century, again, everything was lost. But people kept drawing, there were art schools, it's not like all the talented people disappeared. And what does all this lead to? Conclusion. Whether I like it or not, I have to admit that the absence of masks and fingerprints, plus the layering, indicate that the emulsion was applied to the canvas in successive layers. The fact that optics were used was proven by David Khokney, and it suggests the possibility of developing an image directly in the layers of emulsion by the method of photoexposure. This confirms the remarkable origin of the colors in the paint layers. On the one hand, one layer is color, and on the other, it is impossible to determine the size of the pigment particles by conventional means. If we assume that each of the emulsion solutions gives its own color, then everything becomes clear. The dark tones in paintings from that era are confirmed by either the fading of layers due to photochemistry or the limited color tones available at the time, also attributed to photochemistry. Because ordinary bright paints did exist. The loss of the secrets of mastery, as well as the disappearance of all the described features of painting by that century, speaks of the loss of the technique and technology that allowed the creation of the corresponding photochemistry, its application to canvas, and the optical projection of the image. It is quite likely that the technology of photo exposure was not lost immediately. Surely its elements were used even in later periods, along with ordinary painting techniques, for example, the same optics. After all, people never stopped using it, and the first elements of photochemistry began to be used again at the beginning of the 19th century. Today, the main key to unlocking the secrets of Leonardo da Vinci should belong to chemists. After all, the composition and color appearance principle in the thinnest emulsion layers could finally clarify everything. It turns out that his views not only preceded modern scientific ones, but were, in a way, on a slightly different plane. He tended to relate observed phenomena more to certain general philosophical laws. On the other hand, he was very practical. That makes it even harder to imagine this man spending months grinding powders in a mortar, fully aware that no one would not only appreciate it, but might not even notice. One way or another, his notes are actually quite difficult to compare with the conclusions that were made above. But there is one big but. We've been handed so many forgeries that we can't vouch for the authenticity of these texts. You can't be 100% sure that these paintings were actually painted by Leonardo da Vinci. Naturally, what I believe in is the overwhelming wave of facts that time and again stubbornly lead us to conclusions about the technologically advanced past of our earthly civilization. After all, someone created these paintings, and in such a way that they simply could not have appeared with medieval technologies. And knowing today that the history we know was created after the 18th century, and seeing how massively it continues to be supplemented with new historical evidence, it can be safely assumed that works of art may be massively replaced with those of modern manufacture. And if necessary, all new works of art and religious artifacts are unearthed by archaeologists, found in all sorts of hoards, hiding places, storerooms, in private and official galleries and libraries. Plus, you also need to consider that most materials and substances cannot be preserved in their original state for several hundred years, and so the items have to be replaced in order for them to continue serving as the foundation of official history. Subtitles created by